There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a boardroom when a deal worth $40 million is about to be signed. It is a heavy golden silence, smelling faintly of espresso and expensive cologne. I was 28 years old, sitting at the head of a mahogany table in the penthouse suite of my architectural firm in downtown Boston, watching the senior partners of a rival development group hold their breath. The morning sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling glass, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny flecks of gold. I had them. They knew it, and I knew it. I picked up my fountain pen, the weight of it familiar and grounding in my hand, ready to finalize the acquisition that would cement my company's status as the premier firm on the East Coast. Then the heavy oak doors burst open. It wasn't a violent entrance, but it was loud enough to shatter the delicate atmosphere I had spent 2 hours cultivating. My executive assistant, a capable young woman named Sarah, who usually guarded my office like a Cerberus, stumbled in looking pale and flustered. Behind her stood two people who looked like they had just stepped out of a Ralph Lauren catalog from 1998. "I tried to stop them, Ms. Sterling," Sarah stammered, clutching her tablet to her chest. "But they insisted they were family. They said—" "It's all right, dear," the woman interrupted, breezing past Sarah with a wave of a manicured hand. She wore a silk scarf tied around her neck and large sunglasses pushed up into her dyed blonde hair. "We wanted to surprise her. Isn't that right, Arthur?" The man behind her, wearing a navy blazer with gold buttons that looked slightly tight around the midsection, nodded jovially. "Surprise indeed. Hello, Pookie." Pookie? My hand froze halfway to the paper. The ink from my pen began to bleed into the document, creating a tiny, jagged black star. The room went dead silent. The investors looked at the intruders, then at me, confusion knitting their brows. I stared at the man and woman standing on my plush Persian rug, smiling as if they had simply returned from a long lunch. It had been 15 years. 15 years since I had seen those faces. 15 years since I had heard that nickname. Constance. I said, my voice barely a whisper, though it seemed to echo off the glass walls. "Arthur." Constance clapped her hands together, the gold bracelets on her wrists jangling with a sound that triggered a headache instantly behind my eyes. "Oh, stop being so formal, darling. It's Mommy and Daddy. We're back." She looked around the room, her eyes assessing the expensive artwork, the view of the harbor, the bewildered faces of the millionaires at the table. "My goodness, Pauline, you've certainly done well for yourself. A little sterile for my taste, but we can fix that." She moved toward me, arms open for a hug. I didn't stand up. I didn't smile. I didn't breathe. I just sat there watching the two people who had discarded me like a seasonal accessory walk back into my life, as if the last decade and a half hadn't happened. They looked older. Constance's neck was looser. Arthur's hair was thinning, but their aura of invincible entitlement was exactly the same. They radiated that specific kind of carelessness that only comes from people who have never had to pay for their own mistakes. "I'm in a meeting," I said, my voice dropping an octave, turning into the steel tone I reserved for incompetent contractors. "Sarah, please escort these guests to the waiting area. I will deal with them later." Constance stopped, her smile faltering just a fraction. "Waiting area, Pauline, don't be ridiculous. We've been traveling all morning. We need coffee and perhaps some of those little cucumber sandwiches." "I am in the middle of a $40 million acquisition," I said, finally standing up. I was taller than her now. I was wearing a tailored Italian suit that cost more than the car they had likely driven here in. "Leave. Now." The investors shifted uncomfortably. Arthur cleared his throat, looking at the men at the table. "She gets her drive from me," he announced with a wink. "Always was a firecracker." "Out," I commanded, pointing at the door. For a second, the mask slipped. Constance's eyes narrowed, flashing with that familiar cruelty I remembered from my childhood. But she quickly smoothed it over, laughing a brittle, glassy laugh. "Oh, fine. Be the big CEO. We'll wait. But don't take too long, Pookie. We have so much to catch up on. They turned and sauntered out, Arthur pausing to grab a handful of mints from the crystal bowl on the sidebar. As the door clicked shut, the silence returned, but it was no longer golden. It was suffocating. I apologize, I said to the board, sitting back down and calmly folding the ruined page of the contract over. Where were we? Clause 14. I finished the meeting. I signed the deal. I shook the hands, but inside I was 13 years old again, standing on a curb in the rain, watching taillights fade into the distance. To understand why I didn't throw a chair at them, you have to understand the day they left. Memory is a funny thing. I can't remember what I had for breakfast last Tuesday, but I can remember the exact stitching on the leather seats of my father's Jaguar on November 14th, 15 years ago. I was 13. My sister Meredith was 11. We were packing for what I was told was a semester abroad. Constance had been talking about it for weeks, how civilized European children were, how we needed cultural refinement. I assumed we were all going. The drive was quiet. Arthur was smoking a cigar with the window cracked, letting the cold autumn air bite at my face. We didn't drive to the airport, though. We drove north out of the city into the gray skeletal woodlands of rural Massachusetts. Where are we going? I asked, clutching my backpack. It had my sketchbook in it, the one where I drew houses I'd never live in. A change of plans, Pookie, Constance said, checking her reflection in the visor mirror. Meredith and we are going to Paris. You, darling, are going to St. Jude's. St. Jude's Academy for Girls. I had heard of it. It wasn't a finishing school. It was a dumping ground for the daughters of the wealthy who were too loud, too awkward, or too inconvenient. Why? I asked, panic rising in my throat. Why can't I come to Paris? Because you need structure, Pauline, Arthur said, not looking back. You're difficult. You ask too many questions. You hover. Meredith needs her time to shine without you shadowing her. It's for your own good. Character building. They pulled up to a wrought iron gate that looked like the entrance to a mausoleum. The building was brick, covered in dead ivy looming under the gray sky. Arthur didn't even turn off the engine. He popped the trunk. Hop out, kiddo, he said. I stood on the wet pavement, my 2 suitcases beside me. Constance rolled down the window. She didn't look sad. She looked relieved. Don't look so tragic, she said, lighting a slim cigarette. It's only until the spring. We'll write. Be good. Don't embarrass us. But I don't want to stay here, I pleaded, tears stinging my eyes. Please, Mom, I'll be quiet. I won't ask questions. Goodbye, Pauline, she said, and the window rolled up. I watched the Jaguar pull away, kicking up wet leaves. I watched until it was just a speck, then nothing. I stood there for 20 minutes until a nun came out and ushered me inside. I waited for the letters. Every day at mail call, I stood at the front, heart pounding. Meredith sent one postcard 3 weeks in a picture of the Eiffel Tower with "having fun eating croissants" scrawled on the back. From my parents. Nothing. Not a call. Not a note. Then came the day the world froze. It was 3 months later. February. The heating in the dormitory was spotty, and I was wearing 2 sweaters. The headmistress, a stern woman named Mrs. Galloway, called me into her office. She looked uncomfortable, which was rare for her. Pauline, she said, removing her glasses, we have a problem. Is it my grades? I asked. I had straight A's. I thought if I was perfect they would come back faster. No, it's your tuition. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a check signed by Arthur Sterling. Stamped across the front in angry red ink were the words, "Insufficient funds." There must be a mistake, I whispered. My parents were rich. We had a summer house in the Hamptons. We had horses. We tried to call the numbers on file, Mrs. Galloway said gently. They've been disconnected. We called your father's office. They said he liquidated the firm 3 months ago and moved overseas. There is no forwarding address. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. Liquidated. Moved. No address. What does that mean? I asked, my voice trembling. It means... Mrs. Galloway said, her voice pitying but firm. That no one is paying for you to be here, and since we cannot reach your guardians, we have had to contact the state. The state Child Protective Services will be here in an hour, Pauline. You need to pack your things. I didn't cry. I think I went into shock. I walked back to my room numb and packed the same 2 suitcases I had arrived with. I looked at the empty bed next to mine, the gray sky outside the window. They hadn't just left me at school, they had discarded me. They had sold the business, taken the money taken, Meredith, and vanished, leaving me as a bounced check in a drafty boarding school. I sat on my trunk in the hallway waiting for the social worker. That was the moment Pauline the child died. And in the cold silence of that hallway, something else began to form, something harder, colder, and sharper. I promised myself then that I would never, ever rely on anyone again. The next 6 years were a blur of beige walls, overworked caseworkers, and the smell of industrial cleaning products. I wasn't cute enough to be adopted quickly, and I was too angry to be foster-friendly. I bounced between 3 group homes before I aged out at 18. The state gave me a handshake and a small stipend that barely covered a month's rent in a shoebox apartment in South Boston. I didn't dissolve into the tragedy, though. I solidified. I worked 3 jobs. By day, I was a barista. By night, I scrubbed floors in office buildings I vowed I would one day own. On weekends, I worked at a diner near the financial district called the Gilded Spoon. That was where I met Genevieve. I was 19. It was a slow Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting on a stool behind the counter during my break, reading a tattered copy of Architectural Digest I had fished out of a recycling bin. I was sketching a revision of the Guggenheim on the back of a paper placemat, trying to figure out how to maximize natural light without compromising structural integrity. The bell above the door chimed. In walked a woman who looked like she owned the atmosphere she breathed. She was in her 60s with silver hair, cut in a sharp bob, and a tweed Chanel suit that looked older than me but was in pristine condition. She sat in a booth by the window. I put my magazine away and grabbed my pad. Coffee? I asked. Black, she said. She didn't look at the menu. She looked at me. Then she looked at the placemat I had left on the counter. Is that yours? I flushed. Sorry, I'll throw it away. Bring it here, Kao, she commanded. It wasn't a request. I hesitated, then brought the placemat over with her coffee. She put on a pair of reading glasses and studied my sketch for a long time. The silence stretched. I shifted my weight, waiting for her to mock me. The load-bearing distribution is wrong on the 3rd tier, she said finally, tapping a manicured nail on the paper. But the concept for the atrium is brilliant. Who taught you this? Books, I said defensively. And I like looking at buildings. She took off her glasses and looked at me. Her eyes were gray, piercing, and intelligent. I'm Genevieve Thorpe. Do you know who I am? I shook my head. Good. Fame is tedious. I made my money in commercial real estate before you were born. I own the building across the street and the one next to it. I'm looking for a personal assistant. My last one was an idiot who thought urgency was a suggestion. I have a job, I said. I have 3, actually. And you're wasting your time at all of them, she said bluntly. You have an eye for structure, but you dress like you're apologizing for your existence and you slump when you speak. I can teach you the business, or you can keep pouring coffee for men who tip you in quarters. What's your name? Pauline, I said. Well, Pauline, my driver is outside. If you want a life, get in the car. If you want this, she gestured to the diner, stay here. She stood up, dropped a $100 bill on the table for a $2 coffee, and walked out. I looked at the money. I looked at the dirty apron around my waist. I looked at the grease stains on the counter. I untied the apron, left it on the pile of dirty dishes, and ran out the door. The black town car was waiting, the engine purring. The back door was open. Genevieve was inside reading the Wall Street Journal. She didn't look up as I slid into the seat, breathless and terrified. Buckle up, she said, turning the page. We have a lot of work to do. That car ride was the opposite of the one with my parents. That one had taken me to a prison. This one was taking me to my life. Genevieve Thorpe did not just employ me. She dismantled me and rebuilt me from the ground up, brick by brick. The first month was hell. I thought I was being hired to file papers and answer phones. Instead, I was enrolled in what Genevieve called the School of Reality. "Stand up straight," she would bark at me as we walked through construction sites in hard hats. "You are taking up space in this world, Pauline. Act like you deserve it." She took me to tailors not for fashion but for armor. "Clothes are language," she told me, tossing out my polyester slacks. "Cheap fabric whispers insecurity. Wool and silk speak authority. When you walk into a room, your clothes should say, 'I am in charge,' before you even open your mouth." She paid for my night classes in architecture and business management, but the real education was in her library. She taught me how to read a contract and find the trap doors. She taught me the difference between being rich, having money, and being wealthy, having power. "Your parents, why," she said one night over brandy in her study, she had eventually dragged the story out of me, "were rich. They had cash flow, but they lacked substance. That's why they ran. Wealthy people don't run, Pauline. They stand their ground and they buy the land the problem is standing on." She was tough. She never coddled me. When I cried over a failed exam or a harsh negotiation, she would hand me a tissue and say, "Dry your eyes. Tears dissolve the ink. Fix it." But she was also the mother I had never had. I remember my 24th birthday. I had just passed my architectural licensing exam. I came home to her estate. I lived in the carriage house by then to find a small box on the kitchen table. Inside was a set of vintage drafting pens, heavy silver with pearl inlays. They were exquisite. "My father gave those to me when I closed my first deal in 1974, Genevieve said, leaning against the doorframe. She looked older now, her movements a little slower, but her eyes were just as sharp. "I never had children, Pauline. I was too busy building an empire. I used to regret that." She walked over and placed a hand on my cheek. Her skin was cool and smelled of lavender soap. "I don't regret it anymore," she said softly. "You are the finest structure I have ever helped build. You are my legacy." I hugged her then, burying my face in her shoulder. It was the first time in 10 years I had felt safe, truly safe. By the time I was 28, Genevieve had retired, handing the daily operations of her firm over to me, which I rebranded and expanded. I was fierce. I was capable. I was everything Constance and Arthur had claimed they wanted me to be, but achieved in spite of them, not because of them. I had forgotten them, or so I thought, until they walked into my office and popped a mint into their mouths. Back in the office, the air conditioning hummed, but I felt hot. Sarah had cleared my schedule for the afternoon, sensing the tectonic shift in my mood. I sat at my desk, staring at the closed door of the waiting room, where my parents were currently eating the cucumber sandwiches they had demanded. Genevieve was at her country estate in the Berkshires pruning her prize-winning roses. I needed to call her, but first I had to face them. I buzzed Sarah. "Send them in." They walked in with their usual swagger, but now that the audience of investors was gone, there was a jagged edge to their desperation. Constance sat down without being asked, crossing her legs. "Finally," she sighed. "That took forever. You know, Pauline, this office really is dreadful. It's so masculine. You need some color, maybe some florals." "Why are you here?" I asked, leaning back in my leather chair. I didn't offer them water. I didn't offer them a smile. Arthur laughed nervously. "Can't parents visit their daughter?" "We missed you, kiddo. We've been living in Monaco. Beautiful place. But the taxes—" He trailed off. "We heard about your success." Constance cut in, her eyes gleaming. "Saw you in Forbes. The 30 under 30 architect reshaping Boston. We were so proud. We told everyone, that's our girl. We taught her everything she knows." I felt bile rise in my throat. You taught me that checks bounce and phone numbers get disconnected. Constance waved a hand dismissively. Oh, don't be dramatic. That was a misunderstanding, a clerical error. We tried to call, but the lines were down, and then we moved, and life just got away from us. You know how it is. 15 years, I said flatly. You didn't call for 15 years. Well, we knew you were resilient, Arthur said, trying to sound complimentary. We knew you'd land on your feet, and look at you, CEO. Cut to the chase, I said. You didn't come here for the decor. You're sniffing around for something. What is it? Constance and Arthur exchanged a look. The look of two sharks deciding who bites first. It's Meredith, Constance said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. She married poorly. A charming Italian count who turned out to be a waiter with a gambling problem. He drained her trust fund. He drained our accounts. We're a little liquid challenged at the moment, Arthur admitted, wiping sweat from his forehead. Just temporary, of course. We have assets, but they're tied up. We need a bridge loan, just to get settled back in the States, to help your sister. How much? I asked. 2 million, Arthur said quickly. Just a loan. We'll pay you back with interest once the Monaco villa sells. I stared at them. They had abandoned me at a boarding school with no money left me to the foster system, ignored my existence for a decade and a half, and now they wanted $2 million to bail out the golden child who got to go to Paris. And you think I owe you this because we're family, Constance cried, clutching her pearls. Blood is thicker than water, Pauline. We gave you life. We sacrificed so you could have this toughness. We made you independent. You owe us. The audacity was breathtaking. It was almost a work of art. I see all, I said. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city I had conquered. I could have thrown them out then. I could have called security. But Genevieve had taught me better. Never react in anger, react in strategy. When someone shows you their neck, you don't scratch it. You wait until you have the knife. I can't authorize that kind of money today, I said, turning back to them. My assets are also structured, but I am willing to discuss it. Their faces lit up. Oh, Pookie, we knew you were a good girl, Constance squealed. Meet me tomorrow, I said. Lunch, the Ritz-Carlton, 1 o'clock. We'll discuss the terms. The Ritz? Constance beamed. Now that's more like it. See, Arthur, I told you she was reasonable. 1 o'clock, I repeated. Don't be late. They left practically skipping. They thought they had won. They thought I was still the 13-year-old girl desperate for their approval. I waited until the elevator doors dinged, signaling they were gone. Then I picked up my phone and dialed the only number that mattered. Genevieve, I said when she answered. They're back. I need you. Describe them to me, Genevieve said. She was calm. I could hear the snip-snip of her gardening shears in the background. Desperate, Sue, I said, pacing my office. Tacky. They think they can charm me out of $2 million because Meredith married a con artist. Meredith, Genevieve mused. The one who got Paris. Yes. And they think you're going to give it to them. They think I'm a starving dog who will do tricks for a scrap of affection, I said bitterly. They think 15 years of silence can be fixed with a nickname and a lunch date. And what do you think, Pauline? I stopped pacing. I looked at the silver drafting pens on my desk, the ones Genevieve had given me. I think I want to destroy them. Good, Genevieve said. But we don't destroy with hammers, darling. We destroy with scalpels. It's cleaner. I'll drive down tonight. Make the reservation for 3. You're coming. Try and stop me. Wear the emerald silk blouse I gave you, the one with the high neck. It makes you look like a queen and makes other women look like peasants. We'll see who the matriarch really is. The next morning I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I went to the office, handled my emails, and prepared for lunch. I wasn't nervous. I was anticipating it like a chess player who sees checkmate 5 moves ahead. I arrived at the Ritz at 12:55. The maitre d', who knew me by name, led me to the best table in the conservatory. A sun-drenched room filled with orchids and the soft clinking of silver. Constance and Arthur were already there. They must have arrived 20 minutes early. They were drinking champagne. "Pauline?" Constance waved a little too loudly. People turned to look. She was wearing a dress that was too young for her, something floral and low-cut. Arthur was wearing a linen suit that looked rumpled. I sat down. "Mother, father." "Oh, look at you," Constance cooed, reaching for my hand. I pulled it back to pick up my napkin. "So professional. But you look tired, darling. Are you working too hard?" "A woman needs to watch her stress lines. No husband yet." "I'm married to my work," I said coolly. "Sad." Constance sighed, sipping her champagne. "Meredith has had 3 proposals. She's just so magnetic. Men love her. She's so soft. You were always a bit sharp, Pauline." "Sharpness opens doors," I said, "and cuts people," Arthur added with a chuckle, reaching for the breadbasket. "So about the transfer, we were thinking a wire would be best. Checks take so long to clear these days." "We haven't ordered yet," I said, "and we are waiting for one more guest." Constance frowned. "Guest who?" "A lawyer." "We don't need lawyers, Pookie. We're family." "Not a lawyer," I said, looking toward the entrance. "My advisor." At that moment, the room seemed to quiet down. Standing at the entrance of the conservatory was Genevieve. She was 70 now, but she stood straighter than anyone in the room. She was wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that cost more than Arthur's life insurance policy. Her silver hair was swept back, revealing diamond studs that caught the light. She held a cane not for support, but as a scepter. She scanned the room, locked eyes with me, and smiled a terrifying, predatory smile. Constance turned to see what I was looking at. Her eyes widened. She recognized the look of money. Real money. Genevieve walked toward our table, the maitre d' practically bowing as she passed. She arrived at the table and looked down at Constance and Arthur, as if they were gum on the sole of her Gucci loafer. "Sorry I'm late," Genevieve said, her voice smooth as velvet. "Traffic in the tunnel was dreadful." "Who is this?" Constance asked, her voice shrill. "This," I said, standing up to pull out Genevieve's chair, "is Genevieve Thorpe, the woman who raised me." Constance laughed. It was a nervous, confused sound. "Raised you?" "What on earth are you talking about? I'm your mother." Genevieve sat down, arranging her napkin with precise, elegant movements. "Biologically, perhaps. But biology is the least impressive part of parenthood, Mrs. Sterling. Any stray cat can give birth. Raising a predator, that takes skill." Arthur choked on his bread roll. Constance went red. "Excuse me, who do you think you are? The nanny?" "I am the woman who paid for her college," Genevieve said calmly, signaling the waiter for water. "I am the woman who taught her how to leverage assets. I am the woman who held her hand when she had appendicitis at 22, while you were— Where were you, Bali, Ibiza?" "Monaco," Arthur mumbled. "Monaco," Genevieve repeated, tasting the word like sour milk. "A playground for people pretending to be relevant." "Now see here," Arthur blustered, trying to summon some authority. "We are the parents. We have rights." "You have no rights," I cut in. "You forfeited your rights when the check bounced at St. Jude's." "We explained that," Constance snapped, turning on me. "It was a mistake, and look at you. You turned out fine, better than fine. You should be thanking us. If we hadn't left you, you wouldn't have met her. You wouldn't be rich." "You want credit for my success because you abandoned me?" I asked, incredulous. "It was a sink or swim moment," Constance said, leaning forward. "And you swam Meredith. Meredith is fragile. She needs us. You never needed us." "Every child needs parents," Genevieve said softly. The table went quiet. "Pauline needed you. She waited for letters that never came. She cried herself to sleep in a foster home with bars on the windows. Foster home? Arthur looked pale. We thought the school kept you. The school wasn't a charity, Arthur, I said. When the money stopped, I was evicted. I was a ward of the state for 5 years. I owned 3 shirts and a toothbrush. Constance looked away, fidgeting with her bracelet. Well, we didn't know. We thought you were safe. You didn't care, I corrected. We're here now. Constance slammed her hand on the table. Doesn't that count for something? We came back, and we need help. Your sister is going to lose her home. Are you really going to be so cold-hearted as to let your own flesh and blood suffer because of a grudge? It's not a grudge, Genevieve said. It's a risk assessment. You are a bad investment, Mrs. Sterling. You have a history of default. You liquidate assets and run. Why would Pauline invest in a failing enterprise? I wasn't asking you, Constance hissed. She looked at me, her eyes wet with manipulative tears. Pookie, please. Just this once. We'll disappear again if you want. Just help us save the villa. For Meredith. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me, begging for money to save the sister who got everything I was denied. I need time to think, I lied. We don't have time, Arthur said. Then you don't have the money, I said simply. I am hosting a charity garden party this Saturday at the firm's estate. It's for the Foundation for Foster Youth. Come, we can talk there. But do not make a scene. A party. Constance wiped her eyes, perking up instantly. Will there be press? Boston's finest, I said. We'll be there, Constance said, fixing her hair. We'll be there and we'll sort this out. Family always does. Genevieve caught my eye. She raised an eyebrow. She knew exactly what I was doing. Saturday was perfect. The sky was a piercing blue, the kind that makes the hydrangeas pop. The firm's estate was buzzing with the creme de la creme of Boston society. Politicians, developers, artists, and old money families wandered the manicured lawns, sipping champagne and bidding on silent auction items. I stood near the fountain wearing a white structural dress that made me look like a modern sculpture. Genevieve was seated nearby in a wicker throne holding court with the mayor. They're here, Sarah whispered in my earpiece. I looked toward the entrance. Constance and Arthur had arrived, and they hadn't come quietly. Constance was wearing a massive hat with a peacock feather and a dress that was bright fuchsia. Arthur was in a white tuxedo that looked ridiculous in the afternoon sun. They weren't just attending, they were campaigning. I watched as they intercepted one of my biggest clients, Mr. Henderson. I saw Constance laughing, touching his arm, pointing at me. She was working the room. She was telling them who she was. She was staking her claim. I walked over, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm of war drums. Pauline, Constance cried when she saw me, pulling me into a side hug that trapped me against her perfume. Mr. Henderson was just telling me about your project in the seaport. I told him, she gets that vision from her father. Mr. Henderson smiled politely. Your parents are charming, Pauline. I didn't know they were in town. They're just visiting, I said, extracting myself. Visiting, we're thinking of staying, Arthur announced, grabbing a flute of champagne from a passing waiter. Thinking of joining the board, maybe keeping an eye on the family business. He winked at Mr. Henderson. My blood ran cold. They weren't just here for the loan anymore. They saw the life I had built and they wanted to move in. They wanted to be the parents of the CEO. They wanted the glory without the work. We should discuss the loan, Constance whispered in my ear, her grip on my arm tightening like a claw. Arthur saw a lovely condo in Back Bay. If you cover the down payment plus the $2 million for Meredith, we can all be together again, just like old times. Just like old times, what I repeated. When you left me. Oh, hush, she hissed. Don't ruin the party. People are watching. You wouldn't want them to know you're an ungrateful daughter, would you? It might hurt your stock price. It was a threat, a clumsy, desperate threat. She thought she could blackmail me with the fear of a scandal. You're right, I said, smiling a smile that didn't reach my eyes. People are watching, and I think it's time they knew exactly who you are. What? Constance frowned. I turned and walked toward the stage where the microphone stood waiting. The band stopped playing. The chatter died down. "Where is she going?" I heard Arthur ask. "To the podium," Genevieve answered from her seat, her voice carrying clearly. "Watch closely, Arthur. This is the part where the bill comes due." I stepped up to the podium. The microphone feedback whined for a split second, silencing the last of the murmurs. I looked out at the sea of faces, hundreds of people who respected me, who feared me, who admired me. And in the center, standing like two fuchsia and white sores on the landscape, were my parents. "Thank you all for coming." I began, my voice steady and amplified across the gardens. "Today is about supporting the Foundation for Foster Youth. It is a cause that is personal to me." I paused. I saw Constance smiling, waving slightly to someone she didn't know. She thought this was part of the show. "Many of you know me as Pauline Sterling, the CEO," I continued. "You know my buildings. You know my reputation. But very few of you know my foundation." I looked directly at Constance. 15 years ago, I was dropped off at a boarding school with a suitcase and a promise. A few weeks later, my tuition check bounced. My parents had liquidated their assets, taken my sister, and moved to Europe. They left no forwarding address. They cut the phone lines. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Mr. Henderson's jaw dropped. Constance's smile froze, then shattered. Arthur took a step back, looking for an exit, but he was hemmed in by the crowd. "I spent 6 years in the foster care system," I said, my voice rising with the strength of the truth. "I learned that blood doesn't make you family. Blood makes you related. Loyalty makes you family. Love makes you family." I pointed to Genevieve. "That woman," I said, "Genevieve Thorpe, found me when I was a waitress cleaning tables. She didn't share my DNA. She shared her wisdom. She shared her home. She invested in me when my own stock was at zero. She is my mother. She is the reason I stand here today." Applause started scattered at first, then thundering. Genevieve nodded her head regally, a single tear tracing a line down her cheek. I waited for the applause to die down. Then I looked back at Constance and Arthur. They looked small now, shrunken. The crowd had turned from them, creating a physical circle of empty space around them. They were isolated. "Yesterday," I said, "my biological parents returned. They walked into my office after 15 years of silence. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't apologize. They asked for $2 million because they squandered their fortune and abandoned me to save themselves." The crowd murmured angrily. I saw looks of disgust directed at the couple in the center. "I invited them here today not to give them money," I said, "but to give them an answer publicly so there is no confusion." I leaned into the microphone. "Constance, Arthur, the answer is no. You invested in one daughter. You took her to Paris. You left me behind. That was your choice. This—" I gestured to the estate, the guests, the life I had built. "This is my return on investment, and you have no shares in this company." "How could you?" Constance screamed, her voice cracking audible even without a microphone. "We are your parents." "No," I said simply. "You are just people I used to know." I signaled the security team. "Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Sterling off the property. They are trespassing." The walk of shame was excruciatingly long. 2 large security guardsmen, I paid very well to be discreet but firm, stepped up to Constance and Arthur. Constance tried to argue, tried to pull the "do you know who I am" card, but in this crowd, nobody cared who she was. They only knew what she had done. Arthur looked defeated. He didn't fight. He just hung his head. The illusion of the wealthy patriarch dissolved completely. He looked like what he was, a broke, aging man who had bet on the wrong horse. I stepped down from the podium. The guests parted for me like the Red Sea. They didn't look at me with pity. They looked at me with a new level of respect. I hadn't just built buildings. I had built myself. I met them at the gate. I had one last thing to give them. I pulled an envelope from my clutch. Here, I said, handing it to Arthur. Is it a check? Constance asked, a glimmer of pathetic hope in her eyes. Did you change your mind? Open it, I said. Arthur tore it open. It was a legal document, a restraining order, and behind it, an invoice. What is this? Arthur asked. An invoice, I said, for the emotional labor of the last 2 days, and for the cucumber sandwiches. You can mail the check to my assistant. I expect it will bounce, but it's the principle that matters. You're cruel. Constance spat, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. You're cold. You're heartless. I'm what you made me, I said. Goodbye, Mother. Have a nice flight back to nowhere. I turned my back on them. I heard the gate click shut. I heard Constance sobbing, demanding a taxi. I walked back into the garden. The party had resumed, though the energy was different now. It was warmer, more genuine. I found Genevieve sitting on a stone bench near the rose garden, looking at the sunset painting the sky in purples and golds. She patted the space beside her. I sat down, the adrenaline finally fading, leaving a quiet, heavy exhaustion in my bones. You did well, and Genevieve said, taking my hand. That speech, it needed to be said. I feel light, I admitted. I thought I would feel guilty, but I just feel light. That's the weight of the past dropping off there, Genevieve said. You carried them for 15 years, Pauline. Even when they weren't there, you carried the question of why. Today you put it down. I couldn't have done it without you, I said, resting my head on her shoulder. Nonsense, Genevieve said, squeezing my hand. You had the iron inside you all along. I just helped you sharpen it. We sat there as the sun dipped below the horizon, watching the fireflies come out. I was Pauline Sterling. I was a CEO. I was a daughter. Not of the people who left me, but of the woman who stayed. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone to come back. I was already home. Thank you for reading Pauline's journey of resilience and justice. It's a hard truth that sometimes the family we choose is stronger than the one we are born into. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you were in Pauline's shoes, would you have agreed to the lunch, or would you have kicked them out of the office immediately? Do you believe that blood is thicker than water, or is loyalty the true definition of family? Please like and subscribe for more stories about strength, betrayal, and redemption.